Hi, Lenny.
Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 96 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the Front Porch.
So, Lenny, before we get to our interview, you've been doing another acting gig.
Yeah.
Tell me all about it.
Well, I was in Iceland, but I guess I wasn't clear on Facebook. People were thinking I was volunteering with the Red Cross, that I really was in Iceland. I thought I was clear, but I guess I wasn't.
So you weren't literally in Iceland.
I was in Baltimore. And kind of a coffee shop place is where I was.
Was it at least cold?
It was cold.
Well, basically Iceland then.
Yeah, it was a cold day. And the heat was not on very strong in this building for the day.
So the acting part maybe came naturally.
It was cold. And then I thought I should have had my coat on. But because my coat wasn't on, I couldn't then put it on because with the editing process. So I had to leave my coat off the entire day. And I wish it would have been on to start with. The things you learn being an extra. But it was very lovely and it was nice and talked to nice people. And I like being around creative people and that process. So it was my third gig. And yeah, I was glad that I did it. I learn a little bit every time I do it.
What did you learn this time?
I work with different levels of people in different kinds of situations. And this particular group, the lighting people were the hardest working people there. This room had a lot of windows in it. And we were there from, what was it, like 8:30 or 9:30 in the morning until dark. And the sun kept moving. Oh, no, the sun doesn't move. We would move.
Yeah.
The scene that we were doing was probably not even 5 minutes, but they had to keep covering different windows and they had to keep setting up different situations. It was very complex.
Wow.
And doing this took all day long. And those lighting people never sat down. It was a constant waiting for them, which we could understand.
Yeah.
But they worked really, really hard. And I'm learning like different people's roles more. Oh, she is the director of photography. So she seems like she's over the lighting people. And who I thought was the director wasn't the director. And kind of understanding different people's responsibilities and who's responsible for what. You don't eat the food because you might have like a full muffin there and then they will cut back and you'll do an earlier scene so it can't be half eaten. There's just different things that you learn as you go along.
So what was your acting task for this gig?
Oh, just to sit there and talk. There's a snowstorm and I'm stranded and I'm waiting for the roads to clear.
Okay.
And so basically, I just sat there because it was a very short scene. But at one point, they did say, okay, Linda, you're going to be one of the people that walks in later. And so I had my duffel bag because we were all supposed to bring some kind of full bag because we're travelers. So I had my duffel bag and I sat it down and then I sat at my chair. Ooh, big responsibility.
Very exciting. Well, it is.
Lots of fun. It's just lots of fun. The lady I talked to the most, she's an aspiring model. She's excited because she's going to be going to New York City in a Nike ad. So like, good luck to her. And she never did anything like this before, but she thought, let me try it and see what this is like and what this is. And so, you just meet people with a variety of different backgrounds and interests. And I think you just meet some really kind people. And that is not a surprise to me. I kind of figured getting in with creative people and doing more creative work, that those people are really kind and nice and warm and accepting of others. It's been a pleasure to be a part of it. Now, Nance, I am going to try to be in the next Steven Spielberg movie. I didn't tell you.
Where, when, how?
Well, I put my little shots in and sent the email, but I almost don't want to say it because it's such a long shot, but it's in Cape May.
A beautiful place.
Yeah. And they're looking for people that are just locals. So I look like an ordinary person. I'm not a Hollywood person. I'm just an ordinary person. It's an alien movie. The aliens are coming to Earth. You know, it's a big blockbuster, Steven Spielberg, Emily Blunt, and they just need a lot of extras. And I don't care if I'm just the person sitting in the car. I would love to be a part of it.
You can look afraid of aliens. Just think of parasites, Lenny.
And I think I can run and push people out of the way. If there's an alien attacking me. Yeah. Or I could just be the person sitting at the coffee shop and hear something. And then there's always that stupid person that gets up and looks out the window. What's going on? And then, gets eaten by the bug or whatever. I could do that. I could be like, what is going on out there? And look outside and, get killed. I think that would be fun. I would love to do that. They needed people who had cars too.
You have a car?
I took a picture of my car. I did. I followed all the instructions.
And when will you hear?
I don't know.
Okay.
I just can't imagine that hundreds of thousands of people don't want to be in the next Steven Spielberg movie.
I don't know.
I'm hoping it's me.
Yeah, fingers crossed. That'd be super cool.
I know. I can't wait.
But, Cape May doesn't have that big of a population, and people who are free and could spend days on end on set. So that narrows it down.
I hope so.
That's exciting. I'm so glad you're doing this, Lenny. This is so fun.
It is fun. Yeah. Ooh, and you're going to the gala, I understand.
Ooh, tonight.
With a new dress that you made. The one that you made that you showed me with the slit.
I got it done yesterday.
Lovely.
No time like the present to get that dress done.
And crush velvet. And it's not too cold out there today.
No, it turns out it's probably going to be a high of 50 today. So my main concern was being warm. When you have a gala on February 1st, you think it's going to be super, super cold. So my main interest was something long sleeved and warm. But I still think this is going to be very comfortable. Long sleeve, nice boat neck, a deep V in the back, ruching along the side, and a nice big slit up the front.
Yes. Lovely. Saw part of it as it was being made. And what shoes?
I have some silver sparkly shoes I will be wearing.
Very nice.
So I hope I have all the pins out of it at this point and all of the little threads clipped.
Yeah.
But I think I'm ready to go.
That's exciting. Well, you're going to have a fun night.
It's always a fun event. We love supporting the Leeds Center for Performing Arts. There's always great food and great entertainment. It's one of our favorite things that we go to every year.
Oh, you're going to have fun. And you're going to see John there.
I know. Our guest today, John Janovy, is author of the book Life Lessons from a Parasite. He and his beautiful wife, Karen, will be at the Leeds Center tonight. So it will be fun to have a chance to chat with him about this interview.
Yeah, he was a really nice person, Nancy.
He really is.
I can see why his students like him.
He was a very, very popular professor here at the university. No surprise.
Yeah.
Retired a number of years ago. He also happens to be one of the world's preeminent experts on parasites. His works in natural history include the very well-known Keith County Journal, Yellow Legs, Vermilion Sea, A Naturalist Journey in Baja, California, On Becoming a Biologist, 10-Minute Ecologist, and Pieces of the Plains, Memories and Predictions from the Heart of America. His other book subjects include high school athletics, Fields of Friendly Strife, and that was winner of the American Health Magazine Book Award, Anti-Intellectualism in America, and that book is called Comes the Millennium, Higher Education, Teaching in Eden, and Travel, Africa Notes, Reflections of an Eco-Tourist. He is the co-author of 5 editions of Foundations of Parasitology. This is the leading textbook in his discipline, and he's the senior editor of A Century of Parasitology, Discoveries, Ideas, and Lessons Learned by Scientists, who published in the Journal of Parasitology from 1914 to 2014. He retired from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in 2011, where he was the Paula and D.B. Varner Distinguished Professor of Biological Sciences. John is also a member of my writing group. If you can believe it, how lucky am I that he is a member of my writing group. This group was established about a year ago by our friend Fred Oles, who is retired president of Nebraska Wesleyan University and a playwright and author. And we get together when someone has a finished piece or their piece is far enough along in the process where they want to get feedback from others in the group. So I have been very honored to read one of John's pieces that is in the works toward publication. And we will be reading another one of his pieces next month. And we all read it, we get together, and we give the author feedback. And it's really, really fun. I've just enjoyed that group so much.
Wow. I did not know all of that. Let's get to our interview with John, Nance.
Welcome, John, to the front porch.
Oh, thank you, Nancy, and good to meet you, Linda.
It's nice to meet you, too. We're so excited to have you meet with us today and talk about your book, Life Lessons from a Parasite. How did you get interested in biology, specifically parasites?
Well, I grew up on the north edge of Oklahoma City, and we were, you could walk nearby and trap muskrats and go hunting. And I just grew up as a kid who was out in the field all the time. And my parents sort of encouraged that. My dad was a geologist, and I got to go with him on out to some wells at times. And so I think just being a biologist was sort of natural. When I got to college, I ended up majoring in mathematics, but my last semester of my senior year, I took a course from George M. Sutton, who was a world-renowned ornithologist and artist. And by the end of that summer, I said, I'm going to be just like this guy. I want to be another Sutton. So I came back to graduate school, and it seemed to me that my fellow grad students who were studying parasites always had the most interesting questions. So eventually, I became a parasitologist.
Well, one thing I really liked about your book was your passion for your field.
Right.
And how you were able to give that passion to your students. It just seemed so natural. So to hear that you got the passion from someone else, and then you were being able to stir the flames under the younger generation to get them interested in this field.
Well, it's not very difficult if you have live stuff for them to get their hands on. Live animals, live organisms, and a question to try to answer using that material, time to do it, and the resources to do it, the space, the microscopes, all of it. Just turn them loose and let them play.
Yeah.
Which is actually work, but they don't know it.
It did seem like a lot of work to me. It did.
Once you get into it, it's more play than work.
Then I guess you're in the right field.
Right.
In your book, Life Lessons from a Parasite, you say that everyone should become a parasitologist. Why would that be beneficial for everyone, at least to be an amateur parasitologist?
Well, you begin to look at almost any phenomenon that moves through a population as an infective agent of some kind, whether that's an explosive word or an idea or a piece of technology of some kind. So the whole idea, if you're a manufacturer, for example, in producing something, you want to start an epidemic of people who buy it. So I think that the whole concept of one item or thing or phenomenon getting into another living organism. That really is what parasitology is all about.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we tend to look at almost everything that can move, and that's from worms to words. Almost anything that can move through a population as functioning like a parasite, whether it's really classified in the books as such or not.
And there are good parasites and bad parasites. How do you distinguish between those?
Well, good and bad are human constructs, and to a parasite that humans think is bad, the human is just another opportunity to eat and reproduce. So it's a place to live and a place to occupy, and food and shelter and sex. That's about it. So.
And how about distinguishing between, again, I guess I am falling back on human terms, good infective words and bad infective words that move through the population or ideas?
In order to answer that question, you really need to fall back on what it means to be an ideal human being. What are the ideal characteristics of a human? And it's sort of understanding and kindness and empathy and rationality and appreciation for all of those strictly human phenomena, art, music, literature. In other words, when you think of what it means to really be a decent human being, then any words or ideas that infect you and sort of destroy that decency can be considered a bad parasitic idea of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And you can hear a lot of them. I don't want to get you in trouble, but
no worries.
You can hear a lot of those dangerous ideas every day on the news.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, that was the interesting part of the book, how words are transmitted and the words change our culture, change our narrative, can change behavior, and how words can become infective and how they can evolve just like the parasite can.
Right.
I kind of got the idea by reading your book is that you biologists spend a lot of time by yourself digging through your
stuff.
Let me tell you, I had to eat fish after reading one of your chapters that my husband made for me. And I try to eat everything he makes for me, whether it's beanies, a weenie, I don't care what it is. If he makes it, I'm eating it.
Yeah.
And it was really, really hard, John. It was a tough challenge.
Yeah, the general rule is, and I think I'm close on this, 160 degrees for 10 or 15 minutes and you're okay, regardless of what it is.
So you spend a lot of time by yourself in these field labs or these labs, and then you go out to these bars with your colleagues afterwards, and you get into these conversations about infection in our society and transmitting words.
Right.
And so to me, I found this fascinating.
Good.
I really did. I did not know anything about these parasites. You start off as a little embryo somewhere, and then you have to be transmitted someplace else, and you evolve a little bit, and then you have to go someplace else and evolve a little bit, and it's this whole big thing.
You've just described the development of an idea of some kind.
Right. So then these ideas, and then how they blossom. So I'm just wondering, when you're all sitting around having beer at the college bar after class, were you the one who was thinking about all of this stuff, or are these other biologists able to make these parallels between the living world of parasites and us? Are we a parasite for something else? You guys are thinking about these deeper thoughts, I think.
Well, all those deeper thoughts, I will credit the Vietnam War, because when I first came to the University of Nebraska in 1966, that next decade really was sort of the aftermath of the student personality generated by the Vietnam War. The young people I had in lab at the time, they were not intimidated by me. They were not afraid to talk about wild ideas. They were not afraid to try things that they'd never tried before. They were a little bit rebellious. And so that whole habit of generalizing your subject, that's partly due to the circumstances of the time. And the kids, I call them kids, they were very intelligent, very capable young people.
These thoughts that you had that led to this book is something that you've been thinking about here for decades.
Well, a lot of the stuff in that book is just routine daily thinking. However, the book itself started, I believe, with a lunch I had several years ago with a couple of retired colleagues, and we were just talking about our fields and what we had learned from them. And the first draft of that book was actually stories about people driven by their curiosity. That was the whole topic of that book. And the editor at Sourcebooks, Jenna Jankowski, who was a superb editor, she sort of turned that book into something a little more general with some political nuggets here and there, and asking, what do you mean by this, or expand on that. And so I think the whole idea of people being driven by their curiosity is still embedded in that book, but the context is much broader than it was originally.
Yeah, I definitely picked up on that theme of curiosity. That's fascinating that really was the original nugget of where you were going with it, because everyone you introduce us to in this book, they are people who are asking questions of how and why.
Right.
Why is curiosity so important to a scientist and maybe to all of us?
Well, it's clearly important to all of us. Good grief. Think about the artist. How do I represent this? How do I put my idea into a picture? How do I put my emotions into a picture? And the same thing with the composer. How do I put my worldview, my thinking, my feelings into a bunch of notes on paper that turn out to be something that an orchestra plays 100 years later. So,
how can a person nurture their curiosity, do you think? It seems to me you're a naturally curious person, but sometimes I talk to people and they say, well, I don't even know where to start in being curious and then the creativity that leads to it.
Well, I think some of that is in your upbringing. If you had parents who were allowed you to ask questions and told you it was okay to ask questions instead of just saying something like, shut up and do it. Don't ask me why.
Right.
And, so I think that if you have a model who is curious, when you're growing up, then it's okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's part of it. But for a grown-up, a full adult who's never been encouraged in that way, I don't know. I think maybe just talking about why something happens or exploring the causality of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Causality, I think, is sort of a key factor of scientist curiosity. When you read your daily news or all of your social media posts, what you see a lot of causality. So the question of whether that's true or not, somebody should be curious about it.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me that a lot of your students must have been very encouraged by your curiosity and the questions that you challenge them with. And even in the book, there are a number of places you're like, well, this would be a good research topic for a PhD dissertation. Someone needs to explore this. I was thinking, oh my goodness, if there is a PhD student in biology that just really isn't sure what direction they want to go. And sometimes PhD students, they're just not sure where they want to go with the dissertation. They just need to read your book and they will get 100 ideas of directions that they can go that all seem really interesting.
Right. Well, I think that part of the student recruitment issue is the people who are naturally sort of not turned off by your whole approach to education. And I'll admit to actively recruiting some really top students out of my introductory courses.
Yes.
To do undergrad research. I think also, speaking about those research projects, we would always make a long list of projects that might function to get somebody an advanced degree, and rating those in terms of whether they could actually be done or whether they were conceptually significant enough to work to make somebody famous, all of that stuff. So every science project you ever see, every discovery is really a combination of doability and resources available, that combination. So it's always a little bit of a compromise to get an advanced degree or even an undergraduate honors thesis.
Mm-hmm. But I think also what you didn't mention there is your mentoring and how important having a mentor is, and a mentor who can help show you the path.
Well, the age-old secrets to success: surround yourself with people smarter than you are. Get out of their way and let them work. Go out and brag about what they did.
Yeah, I think in this field too, this is something that you really need a mentor. I can't imagine that any of your students can go home and say, "Mom, how can you help me?" This is something where you need somebody else to guide your path. You're getting into a totally different area that a lot of people don't know anything about.
Well, I think for those potential students to watch you work and watch how you handle your dissecting instruments, how you handle your glassware, what do you do with the numbers, all of that is sort of role modelish, and it tends to work. Pick up the techniques and pick up the approaches pretty easily. There are a lot of really smart kids in American higher ed.
That's good. That's a very good thing for our generation to know.
Right.
There's some good kids coming up the ranks. So one thing that's interesting to me, John, about you is that you definitely have the science and the math and that part of your brain that's firing on all cylinders. But then you're a writer. And I don't know, like 20 books? Is that what I'm seeing on your website?
I think it's up into 26, 27, something along those lines. A page a day gets you a book a year, whether they're ever published or not. I've always been an addicted reader. Ever since I can remember getting my hands on books as a kid, I've had them and I've read them and spent lots of time in my room as a kid with the door more or less shut, going through books, and that really lasted until I started writing them seriously.
Wow!
I think my first really serious attempt at writing a novel was in the late '60s, and it, of course, it's one of those things you're embarrassed by, but it's there.
I'm so impressed by that. That's just amazing.
If you're a university prof, you spend a lot of time on university business. And so eventually I just simply started taking my creativity hour. And for years that was over in the student union, some dark coffee and a couple of pieces of dark chocolate for an hour, either before class or after class. There were plenty of times that I spent weekends on university business. I thought I could take this hour a day. And there are several of those books that were actually written in the university's student union.
Wow.
In longhand first, and then a whole sequence of different laptops.
Wow.
So your first attempt at writing was a novel. You say you're embarrassed by it now, but what was it about that kept you going with your first huge breakout, Keith County Journal? What was that journey like?
Well, that first novel was just something you do for self-entertainment in a way, but you're thinking, I'm going to write that novel, make $1 million, walk away from these academic politics. Keith County Journal, that actually started with an art show. I was a member of the Lincoln Artists Guild and was out at Gateway showing a bunch of paintings and trying to sell them. And a woman came along and bought one. She said, you need to take these out at the Nebraska land and see if they'll publish them. So I did, and John Farrar out at Nebraska Land said, yeah, we'll publish them, but you need to write me a paragraph about each of them. So I did, and that chapter 2 wrens, those 2 pictures were the ones that I wrote first. And after I got finished with that and gave it to Nebraska Land, then I thought, I can write some more about these things. And so I started writing more about those 2 birds, and that became the first chapter of Keith County Journal. And once I got that far, I thought, there's a lot of stuff I could do about working out here in western Nebraska. So I just made a list of chapters and started in on it and worked on it every day and let my students read it and let another faculty member read it who did some pretty good editing and started trying to sell it. And eventually it got accepted for publication.
Wow.
Yeah, and did very well.
Yeah.
You're also an artist. Talking about Lenny is saying you've got the mathematics, the science. We thought you had the writing. No, you have the writing and you're an artist. What do you do? Watercolors, drawings?
Drawings and watercolors mainly. Yeah, I was always painting stuff as a kid, and my parents gave me a lot of scratch paper. My father, the geologist, had a big stack of recycled paper at home, the back of oil reports. And so I always had blank paper, and my folks gave me paints, and everything I did, of course, they praised. Oh, Johnny, that's so good, whether it was or not, you know. And I think that that's pretty critical. But I just kept doing it, and eventually I encountered this gentleman, George Sutton, at OU, and at that point I thought, wow, I can learn from this guy. So I just went back to what I'd been doing as a childhood and ended up with some better brushes. Of course, that makes all the difference in the world. And painted the birds we were catching in nets out at the field station and started just painting all kinds of stuff. And so I still do it a little bit fairly regularly.
Wow.
And the drawing, part of that comes from also doing drawings for your scientific publications. Parasitologists tend to be pretty good line artists for that very reason, and especially if they're describing new species that have to be drawn.
Wow.
One of my favorite art stories relative to science, I had a student in the lab who was really enamored with some of this older literature. So he got ready to describe a new species of parasite that lived in tiny little flies, and he wanted me to do a watercolor illustration just like was in some of this old literature. So I did it, and the editor rejected the paper and said, those halftones are especially repulsive or something. So I redid the thing in pen and ink, and it got accepted immediately.
That is awesome. Okay, well, let's talk about one specific parasite that became news to me this week. And that's Robert Kennedy Jr.'s claim.
Brainworm.
Is that he got a brainworm. I checked your website. I guess this is really a tapeworm. Is that right?
Yes. The condition that is called cysticercosis, and that's a larval worm or an immature tapeworm that you acquire by eating tapeworm eggs. And you end up eating tapeworm eggs with contaminated food of some kind. So tapeworm eggs come out of, in this case, probably in pig feces. What happened there was that somehow or another, he picked up a tapeworm egg that had been passed in pig feces, or possibly even some other human feces, and contaminated his food. And that egg hatched, and that larva migrated through his body until it came to his brain. And everything I've read about that indicates that it's calcified, which means it's probably dead, but it's still there.
Oh.
And that affliction, cysticercosis, it's not uncommon, especially in areas of the world where sanitation is not real good.
How does one know that they have a tapeworm in their brain? And can it lead to cognitive decline?
I'm not 100% sure about all of those answers. The ones you read about, there's some motor skill issues or some, not so much cognitive, but instability or dizziness or something of that sort. And they're routinely diagnosed with an MRI.
They're big enough that they can show up in an MRI?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, like how big would this worm have been?
That's a good question. I'm guessing a quarter of an inch, maybe half an inch.
His mother should have told him you wash your hands before you eat. First of all, why are you putting your hands on pig poop?
Depending on where you go in the world and how you behave, you can pick up stuff in all kinds of places. If you go to my website and click on that RFK brainworm,
I did that.
You should have gotten a PDF of a chapter from the textbook.
I saw that.
That was not one of my chapters in that book that I had to write. But I think that there are pictures in there of MRIs or X-rays of those cysts.
Well, the picture that I saw was the bear poop.
Oh,
that
yeah.
Maybe you get it through bear poop. And I'm like, why is he touching bear poop?
Oh, my gosh. If you're a parasitologist, you're looking for eggs. Who knows?
I will say this, John. I have washed my hands more since reading your book, knowing that my hands might be on something that someone else touched. And, I don't want to get any parasites.
Well, that's a good idea. And watch your drinking water, too.
Oh, yeah.
I do watch that. Yeah.
One of the concepts I thought was fascinating in the book was you call the iron wheel. The specific iron wheel that you refer to is biologists' concept of the life cycle. Concepts like the iron wheel are helpful because they simplify events to represent the aggregate, not the individual. But you had a graduate student, Matthew Bullock, and he pointed out that the iron wheel or other simplifications can blind us to what's happening. So in your book, you write, the world is not like you believe it to be. The world is not like you've been told it is. The world is not like your textbooks are claiming it is. So I was thinking about what is the value of simplified models, but also what's the value of understanding how individual experience deviates from the typical experience?
I think the individual experience and the individual knowledge is part of what it makes us human beings, and actually what makes us different from one another in so many ways. But I think the whole idea that however you interpret nature is a simplification, or however you interpret the daily news is very likely a simplification, if not an oversimplification.
I would think
I think
so,
that whole practice of thinking that way is very enriching in many ways, and it provides a lot of understanding and can, in fact, provide some comfort in stressful times. But I think the habit of asking whether or not the story I'm seeing is the complete story. That's a kind of a mental behavior that Matthew Bullock pointed out so incredibly successfully with his research.
I liked what you talk about a couple different places in the book about the difference between the individual and the kind. And we have these prejudices, I guess would be one way to say it, but certainly simplified models in our head about even other people. But then when you meet another person, that often explodes your model of who that person is or who you've been told that that person is, whether it's race, sex, income level, anything. We have these simplified models in our mind that are something that I understand is evolutionary and beneficial for the continuation of our species. We can label things very quickly, but boy, it's those labels that really get us into trouble.
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, and I would agree that that's maybe one of the major points in this book, the difference between the individual and the kind. Nowadays, the political rhetoric talks about kind a lot and tends to weaponize kind. And I think every category of kind that you're hearing in political discussion nowadays, if you really knew the individuals of that kind, then you might think a little bit differently than you do. The people who put the new roof on, the people who pick your vegetables, the gay couple down the street, hardworking, tax-paying. And I think the use of kind as a weapon is a feature of our current political discourse.
What can people do to immunize themselves against that kind thinking and moving to individual level thinking?
It's a very good question. if you're in a profession or in a situation where you naturally encounter a lot of different people, then it's easier than if you're in constantly in a small self-supporting group that has a certain bunch of strong ideas. So I think just simply using your library, going to diverse movies.
Yeah.
I think that being a college prof, I assigned grades based on their work to about 18,000 different students during the course of my career, which involved, a lot of those large enrollment classes. And I would say that there was a full range of individuals and kinds in those classes, from Native Americans to kids who would obviously be classified as trans, to African Americans of all kinds. And what you figure out pretty quickly is that you can't tell what's inside a person by looking at the outside. You simply cannot tell. Once you figure that out, and that usually takes you until the first exam grades after you're a college prof, and you start putting grade scores down beside names, beside people and what they look like on the outside, and you think, uh-oh, there is no correlation here. So that's kind of a life lesson from parasitic exam questions, I suppose.
It also strikes me the way that you phrase that you can't tell what's on the inside based on the outside. That seems like exactly what a parasitologist would say is, you don't know what parasites are in there until you open them up and see what's going on.
Well, yeah, that's true. Your backyard birds, can they be full of worms? In fact, there's a book out called The Flying Zoo. I mentioned that in this book. Yeah, your bird is really a community. Not every individual bird, but certainly a lot of them.
Yeah.
To talk about birds, that day you picked up that bird that flew into that window.
Right.
You know that bird had lice and stuff probably on it, and parasites.
Yep.
And but you had it up to your chin.
Of course. Of course. Of course.
My mom told me never touch a bird.
Oh my gosh.
They're dirty.
Oh my gosh. Well, you're careful if they're alive and able to peck your eye out. You're pretty careful about that. But yeah, you never pick up a live heron. They will pick your eye out.
I thought that showed such a gentleness toward life, that here was this dead bird that you found on campus. You held it up to your cheek. You took it in for the students to see. It seemed to me that another kind of theme of this book is the reverence with which biologists hold life.
Well, yeah, in part because that's the source of their careers. But yeah, and that's also the stimulus to the curiosity that keeps them alive mentally and young mentally. It's partly reverence, but I think it's also a lot wonder, just simply the wonder of that life.
Yeah.
I thought it was interesting, your whole profession, thinking through the ethical standards of, you're taking a lot of life because you have to dissect a lot of stuff to learn about things.
Yeah.
And the respect for life and knowing what you're doing there. I do have a lot of respect for your field, because even with Corona, you learned a lot about viruses, and somebody had to figure out how that was being transmitted and then what to do about it.
Well, COVID-19 was a great big lesson, I can tell you, in biology and in molecular biology and in technology, the development of those RNA vaccines. So we learned a lot about life on Earth with the pandemic.
Any last thoughts on the transmittal and the evolution of thoughts and behaviors on human life forms that we didn't talk about that you might want to put out there for us to think about as we move ahead?
Well, I think that that last chapter, which sort of ties everything together, of words as parasites, I think that for the average person to start thinking of all of those words and phrases that pass through my environment and sometimes come into me as being capable of changing my behavior or altering my behavior in some way, to think of those as infectious agents. And keep in mind that some of those infectious agents are not necessarily bad. For example, if one of them makes you behave in a way that you pay attention to art and music, then you might have been infected by an artist's words. Now, I think just thinking of language, and especially thinking of what we call paralanguage, the phraseology, the emphasis, the behavior that accompanies the words. I think in many ways, paralanguage can be and often is much more powerful than the words themselves.
Well, that's true, isn't it? Wow.
What I loved about the book is it gives us a day-to-day look at the work of biologists and parasitologists, which I knew nothing about. So I thought that was just really fun to kind of be out there collecting samples, dissecting them. Poor Lenny, she's like, no, that does not, no. But then you're taking these concepts and applying them to our lives as human beings and how we interact in the world. I thought it was a fascinating book. We talked a little bit about your writing. You've written everything from nonfiction works like this to fictional works. What are you working on now?
I'm actually working on two things. One of them is you're going to get to read in the next month.
Yes.
That's the book called Daddy's Girl, an Oil Business Story. That's actually the sixth book in a series. But this is one where a 23-year-old recent college graduate ends up, by virtue of a variety of incidents, in charge of a multi-billion-dollar petroleum company. And so her choice is to ultimately testify against her dad in a conspiracy trial or not.
Oh.
So that's where that's going. My agent also has a nonfiction piece, which you read an early draft of, the biography of a drug. It's about ivermectin.
Yes.
And she was sort of waiting to see how Life Lessons did before she starts shopping that around. But we've had communication within the last couple of weeks about where to go with that and what kind of a book that may turn into.
Oh, very interesting. Oh,
I can't wait to read the fiction book that you're
Yeah.
working on. I think, well, you're going to send that out in a couple weeks, right?
Well, sometime in the next week or two, yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Very
wow. You're so talented.
Yeah,
My
seriously.
goodness.
good.
Well, what's the best way for people to keep in touch with you and to see what you're working on?
Well, there's a contact, JJParasite at Hotmail, that's right there on my website. So I think if you just Google John Janovy Jr., if you leave off the junior, you're liable to get our son, who is a real estate agent. So if you may want to buy or sell a house, feel free to contact him.
Okay.
But yeah, I think that if you just Google John Janovy Jr., then you end up at my website and there's contact. And I'm available for Zoom talk really about anywhere in the world on book matters. Anything about which I'm even halfway educated or experienced.
Oh, that's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us on our front porch today. This is so fun to talk with you about life lessons from a parasite, John.
Thank you both, Nancy and Linda. This is really an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. Loved meeting you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, Nancy. He was as nice and personable as you said. Not a
Yes.
stuffy scientist.
Nope.
What a kind person, Nance.
Truly, John is just a wonderful, wonderful, kind, gentle person. The reinforcement of that to me is we start off the interview and he wants to talk about what are the characteristics that ideal humans have, the kindness, the gentleness. And for a parasitologist who is invited to talk about his book, what he wants to talk about is what makes a beautiful human being, and thinking about that and trying to reinforce that in ourselves and avoid anything that is antithetical to that. That's John Janovy right there.
Wow. Well said. And you could see that in his demeanor and his compassion to others, his curiosity.
Mm-hmm.
And his thinking mind, thinking about how these parasites
and how words and ideas shape who we are, and to question things and to really get to know people and not make judgments over them. It was quite beautiful, I think.
Yeah.
It's so hard in the course of just that 30 minutes or so we're talking to someone to capture all that. I hope that came across because he was a really kind person.
I think your summary of our conversation right then and there was so beautiful. I think that really captured so much of what we talked about. Reading a book like Life Lessons from a Parasite, there's a lot of richness. There's a lot of depth in that book. But as I told John, I did love reading it too, just to understand the work of a biologist more. That is just nothing I've ever been exposed to. And just that day-to-day work that they do because they have questions about how do these infective agents move through systems.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. Okay, next month, we're going to read The Mighty Red, written by Louise Erdrich. In this New York Times bestseller, Louise Erdrich tells a story of love, natural forces, spiritual yearnings, and the tragic impact of uncontrollable circumstances on ordinary people's lives.
Ooh.
Like many of her novels, this story takes place in North Dakota and sets geological time, human time, and the span of an individual's life in sharp contrast. The Mighty Red is about our tattered bond with the earth and about love and all of its absurdity and splendor.
I really like Louise Erdrich. She's such a great writer. She writes from a Native American perspective.
Oh.
And also the Northern Great Plains perspective, which we don't have a lot of exposure to in fictional writing in general. She really loves the land. She loves the culture that she was raised in. She has a deep, I think, love and empathy for people. So her writing is beautiful. It can be very unflinching as well, which I like about her. She's not a sweet writer. She writes about the human experience. So I'm really looking forward to reading this book.
Oh, great. Well, I will look forward to reading it too, Nancy. It's been great talking to you today. Have fun at the gala and wearing your special dress.
Yes, thank you very much. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Our website is frontporchbookclub.com.
Our episodes come out twice a month on the first and third Wednesday of each month.
See you next time, Lenny.
See you, Nancy. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.